The whole of high society was excited by the news. The ladies of the court were constantly chatting about the return of the young lady. The men were stunned by the girl's success. They envied the young lady's well-being in an ungentlemanly manner. She appeared before the curious public. The young lady Britney Anders. Envious ladies discussed the magnificent outfit of one of the richest women in the empire. Ms. Britney Anders left her home at a very early age and, with her intelligence and resourcefulness, created a cosmetics company. In her early years, Britney secured an official partnership with an imperial trading company to establish a jewelry manufacturing plant. Britney wasn't interested in talking to envious ladies, especially since she understood perfectly well that for them, she was just Leslie Anders' boring older sister. Duke Anderson's children were magnificent: eldest son Jerry, middle sister Britney, and illegitimate youngest daughter Leslie. Little Leslie effortlessly won the love of her father and all the courtiers. Reserved Britney stood aside. The courtiers loved to compare the sisters, and in any comparison, Leslie was in first place among the servants and gentlemen. The blessing of her mother gave Britney the opportunity to take off. The gift of reviving and growing any plants played a very big role in the girl's life. Thanks to the gift she received, Britney created a cosmetics company and became the richest woman in the empire. Back to the present, Britney turned around when she heard a familiar voice. It was the little sister, Leslie Anders, beloved by all. The meeting of the sisters took place. Leslie was as friendly as always, but reproached her sister for not showing up and not writing to her family for so long. Britney was reserved and arrogant. The resentment towards her father still sat in the girl's heart. The ladies of the court watched the meeting of the sisters attentively. Aristocratic society was very curious to observe the relations of relatives in the Anderson family. Leslie honestly didn't understand why Britney was so angry with her father. Britney was surprised by her sister's behavior. Childish naivety never left the adult Leslie. The gap between the two sisters was great and very noticeable. The conversation between the two sisters was interrupted by the sudden appearance of Father Duke Matthew Anders. The Duke asked Britney to dance and suggested a truce, but the girl kindly refused. Britney understood perfectly well that she would not be able to forgive her family. Just like her father, Britney's older brother, Jerry Anders, appeared before her, but proud Britney rejected Jerry's proposal. But Britney remembered their meanness very well and said that she had already promised the first dance to someone else. The men did not approve of Britney's choice, and a heated dialogue took place between the contenders for the dance. Britney reminisced about her brother and sister's relationship, remembering how she watched them from afar and felt completely unneeded. The half-sister was always closer to her brother. Britney was the culprit of all the troubles, and Jerry drove his sister away more than once. But now Britney was in a completely different situation, and the girl was ready to introduce her chosen one to the family for the first dance. Britney grabbed the young man by the arm and pressed herself against him like a life preserver. Britney remembered that terrible day very well. The girl was on her knees and asking for help from her closest people. Her father and brother were not bending. Britney was faced with the choice of drinking poison or facing execution. The girl chose poison, hoping that she would soon be next to her beloved mother. Britney lay on the cold floor, gasping in pain, blood running down her lips. The brother looked on, not hiding his disdain. Britney slowly died, remembering her attempts to avoid death. Britney tried to sneak out of her father's house, but her lover betrayed her. He was going after Britney that day. Wilson's beloved stopped Britney and brought her back to the house. He betrayed her. That's when Britney realized that no one loved her. The only person who loved Britney was her late mother. Even as a child, Britney felt her mother's love. And now, at this very moment, Britney's life is coming to an end. Britney is dying on the orders of her father and brother. This was exactly the sad ending of the novel, a very popular novel in our time. The two girlfriends talked non-stop about the events taking place in the novel. The plot was breathtaking. But the readers did not interpret the novel quite correctly. The main character in the novel was Leslie, the illegitimate daughter of the Duke. The girl deliberately set all her relatives against her older sister. Leslie was constantly making Britney look bad. Leslie had a goal: to get rid of her older sister at any cost. Britney Anders was a threat to Leslie. The heroines switched places. In fact, Leslie was the terrible one, and Britney, the secondary heroine of the novel, was a very good girl. As Britney died, she understood everything. Britney was much loved as a child, but when the Duke brought his illegitimate daughter into the house, everything changed. Leslie was very sweet, helpful, and kind to everyone. Leslie constantly made Britney look bad in front of her father and brother. The confrontation between the two sisters was unnoticed, which is why the cunning Leslie won this battle. Britney recalled that her mother was the only person who loved and supported the girl, but her mother is gone. Her mother died. As she continued to lie on the stone floor, Britney gradually lost consciousness. Britney opened her beautiful eyes and couldn't believe what she saw. A confused mother bowed before the girl. Britney whispered softly. She couldn't understand where she was. Britney thought it was a dream, but in front of her sat her mother, completely alive and well. Britney remembered drinking poison and remembered her father and brother watching her die. Britney lay in bed, and her mother carefully looked after her, worrying about her condition. Mom touched Britney's forehead, trying to determine if she had a fever. Britney lay in bed, confused. Her mother carefully straightened the fallen blanket. The girl was confused. Her mother's words would not leave her head. The mother said that Britney was only 19 years old, and she overexerted herself and fainted. Suddenly, Brother Jerry and Sister Leslie appeared on the threshold of the room. The relatives looked very worried. Mom was glad to see Jerry and Leslie. The woman went to get a doctor, ordering the remaining children to monitor Britney's condition. The brother looked angrily at his older sister. He did not believe that Britney was really sick. And Britney began to suspect something. Britney remembered again that she had been poisoned, and that this death had haunted the girl. Jerry was very unhappy about Britney's illness, and his brother accused his older sister of deliberately wanting to ruin Leslie's birthday. Leslie, with an angelic face, reassured her brother, sweetly telling him that it was not Britney's fault. Britney understood everything. She found herself in the past, and she has exactly 1 year to fix the ending of history. Leslie put on a fake, sweet face, wishing her little sister a speedy recovery. Britney looked at her stepsister with completely different eyes. Britney understood everything perfectly. She began to remember different life situations. Leslie turned to Britney for help. She needed to restore the embroidery on the scarf. Leslie was so sweet. Britney had no idea what was hiding behind that sweetness. The end result was that the scarf was torn imperceptibly. Britney's father and brother accused her of deliberately tearing Leslie's scarf, which was the only memory she had from her mother. Britney couldn't justify herself in any way. As a result, the older sister was always to blame for everything, and Leslie's pranks became more sophisticated and scarier each time. As a result, Britney was always to blame for everything. Leslie looked at Britney with concern, worrying about her health. Britney told her sister that she was okay and that the illness would soon pass. Leslie put on a happy face and turned to her brother, informing him that Britney had no intention of ruining her sister's birthday. Britney responded to the vile hypocrisy with a beautiful smile, telling Leslie and Jerry that she would definitely come to the party. Britney looked at her brother and sister with a fake smile. The girl remembered that holiday very well. Last time, Leslie gave false information about the dress code, and Britney showed up to the party in a ridiculous outfit. Britney remembered the day of the poisoning and the look in her brother's eyes. The girl also remembered the day when she went to meet her beloved Wilson with a beautiful bouquet of flowers. Britney also remembered that treacherous kiss between Leslie and her fiancé. Britney never forgave Wilson's betrayal. The only fact that warmed my soul was the presence of my living mother. Britney thanked fate for a second chance. The girl gave herself her word that she would fix her life, save her mother and herself. The first person to deal with is Wilson Miles, Britney's fiancé. Britney stood facing the window and tried to figure out how to behave with Wilson. Britney decided not to pretend and to be reserved. She knew perfectly well that Wilson's interest in her person was fueled only for the purpose of meeting her sister Leslie. So Britney saw no point in smiling at the traitor. Moreover, Britney caught one remarkable detail that she had not noticed before. The handkerchief in Wilson's breast pocket gave him away. The thing is, Wilson's pocket square had the Anders family crest on it, but it wasn't a gift from Britney. The girl remembered very well the day when she decided to give Wilson a scarf with her family's coat of arms, but the groom refused to take it. That's why everything became clear to Britney at this moment. Wilson also noticed the changes in the bride's behavior and was very surprised by her coldness. Britney decided not to beat around the bush. She looked Wilson in the eye with confidence. The girl directly told her fiancé that she knew about Wilson's feelings for Leslie. Vincent tried to justify himself. The groom's excuses were worthless. The main thing he was interested in was Leslie's reputation in this situation. But Britney was smart enough not to act out a jealous scene. The girl listened attentively to Wilson's threats, but took them with derision. Britney was already dying, and what did she care about the threats of some poor traitor? Britney put on a mask of friendliness and happiness. The girl told the young man that she wished happiness to him and her half-sister. Wilson looked at Britney in surprise. He didn't understand where the girl got such understanding from. Britney turned to the window and began to talk about her remorse and how she began to perceive life differently. Wilson listened to Britney and agreed with every word she said. Britney wished Leslie and Wilson happiness. The girl smiled sweetly at the traitor, realizing that he would soon pay for his betrayal. The Anders family home was ready to receive guests. All the cream of society was invited to the birthday party of Leslie Anders, the Duke's favorite daughter. The beautiful lady Britney Anders walked confidently across the threshold of the reception hall. The ladies of high society looked around and could not believe their eyes. But the most serious surprise was on Leslie's face. The girl greeted her older sister without hiding her surprise. Britney Anderson sparkled in a beautiful blue outfit and was completely in line with the generally accepted dress code. And that ugly dress, prepared by the little sister, was left hanging in the closet. All the aristocratic nobility looked wonderful. Britney Anders was gorgeous and flawless. The girl told her little sister about another surprise. Leslie froze in anticipation. Wilson Miles appeared on the threshold, wearing a beautiful pink suit. Leslie was horrified. This was not what she expected from the holiday. Leslie and Wilson were dressed in matching colors and looked like a married couple. Leslie heard the ladies of the court whispering. Gossip was flying around the reception hall. Wilson Miles was determined, ready to make the first move. An embroidered silk handkerchief given to him by Leslie appeared in Wilson's hands. Wilson couldn't contain his feelings. The young man fell on one knee and proposed to his beloved Leslie. A fist clenched in rage crashed down on the Duke's desk. The Duke was furious. For the first time in his life, a stain of shame had fallen on the Anders family. Britney and her mother sat opposite their father. Britney made a painful, suffering face, wishing her sister personal happiness. Britney planned everything in advance, but the girl could not even imagine how well everything would turn out. The enamored Wilson did everything herself. The young man played out such a funny scene that Leslie will have to explain it for a very long time. Britney looked her father in the eyes and wished her little sister personal happiness. She asked him not to worry about her feelings. The main thing is her sister's feelings. But the Duke was very upset. He did not want to put up with such a disgrace. Britney looked down, knowing in her mind that everything had worked out well. The mother, sitting nearby, calmed her daughter like a fog. The Duke rose from his seat in anticipation of his guilty daughter. Leslie and Jerry appeared at the door of the office. The Duchess and her daughter watched what was happening carefully. The Duke was beside himself with rage. He asked Leslie to explain how Wilson had gotten hold of Leslie's handkerchief and why Wilson had proposed to her. Jerry stood up for his sister. He nervously began to explain to his father and justify Leslie. The Duke interrupted his son, demanding an explanation from his youngest daughter. Britney watched her stepsister's behavior closely. Leslie began to make excuses and come up with a fictitious story. The Duke bowed his head. He was very upset. The Duke demanded that Britney and Wilson's engagement be broken off immediately. Britney watched Leslie's behavior. The girl constantly pressed on pity. Brother Jerry comforted his half-sister, continuing to defend the girl and blame Wilson for everything. But unexpectedly for everyone, the Duchess entered the dialogue. Mother was interested in why Leslie and Wilson's outfits matched in color and fabric. There was an unambiguous pause in the office. Everyone gathered fell silent for a second, and only Mom reminded everyone that all the guests were wearing blue. And Leslie and Wilson's outfits are in pink tones? Britney hung her head, silently thanking her mom for such support. But Britney added fuel to the fire by asking the same question as her mom. Leslie froze, not knowing what to answer, but the girl could say nothing except a pitiful shrug. Leslie's older brother came to her defense, saying it was a coincidence and accusing her mother of being unfair to her adopted daughter. Britney stood up for her mother, reminding her brother that her mother never divided children into her own and others and was equally kind to everyone. At the same time, the older sister, as if by chance, suggested inviting Wilson Miles himself to clarify the details of what had happened. The Duke was confused. His collar was constricting his throat. The decision was made. The Duke announced his intention to hear Wilson out. Jerry tried to resist his father's decision, defending Leslie. The Duke was adamant and demanded that Wilson be called. A few minutes later, Wilson Miles appeared before the Duke and his family. Duke Anders listened attentively to young Count Miles. The Count said that he loved Leslie and was ready to marry her immediately. Leslie did not expect such revelations. And within seconds, Leslie rejected Wilson's proposal, telling her father that she did not love the Count. Wilson was upset by the girl's words. He did not expect such an answer. The young man sincerely believed in Leslie's mutual love. Britney watched as Leslie was trapped and trying to escape. Leslie was nervous. The girl frantically looked for a way out. But Wilson is not ready to give up so quickly. The Count did not hide anything and revealed the whole truth to Leslie's relatives. The young man said that Leslie confessed her feelings to him and gave him an embroidered handkerchief, saying that she would never be able to cross her sister and would love the Count and Dalek. Leslie was getting worse and worse. She was frantically trying to figure out how to get out of the water dry. Britney watched her sister tremble. The girl was curious how this story would end. Wilson continued to talk about Leslie's feelings for him. Leslie cried, covering her face with her hands, continuing to deny everything. The Duchess had to intervene in the story. Wilson began to justify himself to the Duchess, suggesting that Leslie was afraid of her sister and therefore denied her feelings. At this point, the Duke and Duchess could not bear it any longer and unleashed all their anger on Wilson. Leslie continued to deny everything and say that Wilson made it all up. Everyone froze, awaiting the Duke's decision. Wilson continued to insist that Britney had intimidated her younger sister and that Leslie was forced to lie. Britney looked at her ex-fiancé with interest. The girl understood perfectly well that Earl Wilson Miles would no longer be in this house. Wilson Miles looked at the Duke and his family with fear. Britney knew that the first traitor was dealt with once and for all. The Duke's wrath was merciless. The engagement was broken off, and Earl Wilson Miles was banished from the Duke's castle. Leslie and Jerry watched the events unfold. The stepsister could not even imagine what a scandal would arise from her attempt to harm Britney. In Britney's bedroom, her mother tried to calm her daughter down. The Duchess tried to find the right words. Her mother believed that such a betrayal and the breakup of the engagement was a very strong blow for Britney. Britney was happy with this outcome because her mother had no idea how cruel Wilson was. It was Wilson in the original novel who did not let Britney escape and dragged her to the castle by her hair. Britney tried to calm her mother down. Our heroine's next task was to save her mother. Britney must save her mother from certain death. Remembering that her mother was about to die, tears welled up in Britney's eyes. The mother looked at her daughter affectionately, and she gently touched her daughter's cheek, trying to wipe the tears from her face. Britney recalled the cause of her mother's death. It was all about cosmetics. Aristocrats used cosmetics containing lead, which was killing young women. Britney held the original novel in her hands and couldn't hold back her tears. In the original novel, Britney's mother died from cosmetic poisoning. The sad day for the ducal family comes 2 months before Britney's 20th birthday. Britney was broken by the loss of her mother, the closest and dearest person. But Britney found her mother's death very suspicious and decided to tell her father about it. The Duke took the information he received with hostility. He treated his daughter very rudely, hitting the girl in the face. Britney, having been hit by her father, did not know who else to turn to for help. The Duke wiped his hands and ordered that the question of his wife's death not be raised. Britney's mom was the only light in her life. Britney had to save her. The Wilson situation cooled Jerry and Leslie's ardor. The attacks from the brother and sister temporarily stopped. Britney was able to spend more time with her mother. The ladies had fun as best they could. The Duchess enjoyed her daughter's company. Britney spent time with her mother, but the approaching date of death frightened the girl. Britney was sure that her mother had been poisoned. Studying her reflection in the aromatic tea, Britney thought about how she could prevent the disaster. Young Duchess Britney Anders very often recalled her half-sister's behavior during the last scandal, and Leslie, who was quiet at the moment, frightened Britney. The girl was thoughtful, thinking about the upcoming tragedy. Mom brought Britney out of her confusion by suggesting that Britney attend the annual celebration. Britney was thinking about something completely different. The girl was scared by her mother's cough. Britney recalled the cause of her mother's death. The lady knew for sure that the dishes were clean, and no traces of poison were found on the dishes. Britney watched closely as her mother sipped the aromatic tea. The girl decided that perhaps the food or drinks would be poisoned. Britney gritted her teeth in rage and decided to test her theory. The two ladies finished drinking tea, and Britney, in the presence of her mother, invited the butler. The loyal family butler Anders did not keep him waiting long, and a minute later he stood before the duchesses. Britney ordered the butler to escort her to the kitchen and introduce her to the court chefs. The butler was surprised by the order he heard. But Britney continued to look persistently at the man and demand that the order be carried out. The butler apologized for asking inappropriate questions. The two ladies, accompanied by the butler, headed to the kitchen. The butler continued to drag out time and was in no hurry to open the doors. Britney did not understand what was happening and looked at the servant with displeasure. The girl understood perfectly well that her main weapon was surprise. Britney did not wait for the butler to open the door. The door to the kitchen swung open. The cooks were very surprised and stood with their mouths open. The butler and the duchess stood at the kitchen threshold. Britney ordered the cooks to stop preparing food and step away from their workstations. Britney recalled the first days after her mother's death. The maids brought her food into her room, but the girl refused to eat or drink. For many days, Britney studied various books. The girl did not leave her room and was constantly studying something. Britney had to understand why her mother died so quickly. And now Britney stood in front of a squad of chefs. The girl's eyes were filled with courage and bravery. The cooks did not understand what was happening and looked at the lady with innocent eyes. Britney took out the basilisk flowers she had prepared in advance. The butler and the duchess watched what was happening in silence. Britney took a few steps towards the prepared food. I stopped in front of my mother's favorite syrup and began to carefully study the ingredients. A basilisk flower flashed in Britney's hand, a plant that is inconspicuous and little known to anyone, but the basilisk has the ability to recognize poisons. The cooks watched Britney's actions closely. The basilisk flower slowly fell into the prepared syrup. Everyone present saw black steam coming from the saucepan. There was only one explanation for this. The syrup was poisoned. Britney immediately understood what was going on. The cooks coughed from the acrid steam. An angry Britney immediately demanded to see the person who prepared the poisonous syrup. A young girl cook appeared before the lady. The butler bowed and introduced the new chef. Britney was furious and asked for the girl to be arrested immediately. But Britney's mind returned and she began to ask the girl why and on whose orders the new chef was preparing the poisonous syrup. Britney watched the servants carefully. The butler threatened and demanded a confession from the girl, but the sweet girl did not know what to confess. She was preparing syrup for desserts as usual, according to an old recipe, and did not plan to poison the duchess. The maid told an interesting story. Leslie kindly gave the maid a small handy saucepan. The maid continued to praise the young Duchess Leslie. Leslie was very kind to the new maid. The maid also remembered the unexpected gift. Leslie gave the new cook a saucepan. The cook was very happy and grateful to the lady. Leslie knew full well that the pan was treated with zinc and that food cooked in it would be poisoned. The maid swore to Britney that she had no idea any harm was being done. Britney figured it out. Mom added this syrup to all her desserts and ate it every day. Britney demanded that Leslie be invited into the kitchen to clarify all the details. The butler, surrounded by servants, ordered Mrs. Leslie to be invited into the kitchen. Leslie appeared in the kitchen, and of course the girl denied her participation in poisoning the lady. The butler continued to question Leslie and ask her uncomfortable questions. Leslie had answers for everything. The girl stood calmly in front of the assembled people. Leslie looked at him with a completely innocent look, creating a naive image. Leslie said that she felt sorry for the poor cook and bought a saucepan at the market. The girl does not remember the place of purchase or the seller. An angry Britney didn't believe a single word her treacherous sister said. Britney recalled how Leslie would refuse dessert at dinners together. Each time she modestly lowered her head and covered her mouth with a napkin. At that time, Britney didn't notice anything, and the girl didn't find it strange. The desserts were very tasty, and the whole family ate them, including Britney. At this point, Britney realized that she was able to save not only her mother's life, but her own as well. The maid was confused, but Leslie stood calmly, not betraying her guilt. The maid continued to insist on her version, but Leslie quickly accused the maid of not checking the pot and starting to cook in it. The naive maid was completely disappointed in her mistress. The girl realized that Leslie had sold her out. Britney also realized that Leslie's guilt could not be proven. But most importantly, Leslie's former friendship with her maid is destroyed. Britney angrily saw off the arrested maid. At the kitchen door, the guards were leading an innocent girl. Now the maid understood the full value of friendship with Rapaja. It turned out to be very easy to accuse the maid of unprofessionalism and save her own skin. The disappointed girl threw a few words at the end. The Duchess was shocked by what happened. Britney and the butler supported the woman. Leslie was disappointed. She couldn't understand how Britney could guess about her treachery. Britney was unable to expose Leslie, but the smart girl made sure that Leslie stopped trusting the servants. The threat passed, and the daughter and mother continued to enjoy a happy life, spending time on the beautiful summer terrace. The light conversation between the two duchesses was not forced. The daughter and mother found a common language very well. Britney watched her mother's recovery closely. The girl prepared a wonderful cream from natural ingredients for her mother and handed her a jar of cream. Mom was infinitely happy. The woman couldn't believe her eyes that her daughter had made a wonderful natural cream with her own hands. Britney explained to her mother that it wasn't difficult with her plant-growing abilities. All the Duke's children had magical powers. Jerry had the power of the sword. Leslie had the power to heal. Britney had the power of rebirth and plant growth. In the original story, Britney spent many days in her room trying to resurrect animals. But the only thing she was able to develop in herself was the ability to accelerate the growth of any plants, in any conditions. For many days, Britney developed her magical gift by growing various plants. The beautiful Britney Anders has experienced the power of living plants. The girl realized that she was able to create various cosmetics for body care from delicate flowers and plants. Britney presented her work to her mother with great joy. The Duchess tried the airy cream on her hand. Britney gently helped her mother rub the cream into her hands. The Duchess hugged her daughter and thanked her for her concern. A few days later, the annual festival was held at the Imperial Palace. The butler was preparing to announce the name of the Crown Prince, Crown Prince Anthony Perry. The Imperial Ballroom was magnificent. The marble staircases with wrought iron railings were striking in their luxury and wealth. The beautiful Duchess has almost recovered from the poisoning. All the ladies of the court gasped with delight at her appearance. More than any other young aristocrat, one question worried the young aristocrats: how the Duchess managed to preserve her delicate skin. Britney watched her mother. The girl was happy. No one remembered Jerry and Leslie. Everyone talked only about the magnificent Duchess. The holiday was coming to an end, and two noble persons decided to take a stroll along the evening streets of the capital. Britney, accompanied by her mother, leisurely strolled along the central street of the empire. Mom suggested visiting a sewing shop and buying Britney the most beautiful dress. The daughter did not object, and two duchesses appeared on the threshold of the sewing workshop. The open window of one of the best sewing workshops greeted rich and noble ladies with beautiful outfits. While waiting for her outfits, Britney drank aromatic flower tea. The peace and quiet was interrupted by someone's heavy steps. Britney looked up. Drunk, Wilson Miles approached the girl. Britney did not expect her ex-fiancé to show up and was very scared. Wilson blamed Britney for all his troubles, and he squeezed the girl's hand tightly. The Duchess and the seamstresses who were watching what was happening were horrified by what was happening. Wilson continued to stand over Britney and grab her hand. The man blamed the girl for the fact that Leslie stopped communicating with him and his life was falling apart. Britney didn't know how to get rid of her ex-fiancé. The guards accompanying the duchesses were outside and did not know what was happening inside the workshop. The scandal escalated. Wilson continued to squeeze Britney's hand tightly, causing the girl unbearable pain. The Duchess and the Master Chief did not know how to protect Britney. To everyone's surprise, Wilson's hand was stopped. Prince Anthony Perry himself appeared before the frightened ladies. The prince saved Britney by showing Wilson his place. Wilson let go of Britney's hand, turned around and left the room. Prince Anthony looked at the bully with displeasure. Britney looked closely at the prince, remembering how in the original version of the novel, Anthony stood up for her at the ball. Britney couldn't get this shameful episode out of her head. The girl recalled how she stood behind the wall of the dance hall and listened to the gossip of the ladies of the court. On this day, her fiancé Wilson Miles invited her half-sister Leslie Anders to dance in front of everyone. It was a real disgrace for Britney. Leslie was shining and Britney was insulted. Aristocrats on all sides openly laughed at Britney's disgrace. The disgraced girl didn't know what to do with herself, and only Crown Prince Anthony Perry was able to express words of support to the insulted and humiliated girl. It was on this evening that Britney Anders remembered the Crown Prince as a noble heir to an empire. At the moment, Count Wilson Miles was trying to justify his behavior to the prince, accusing Britney of all sins. Wilson told the prince how Britney had used him for her own purposes. Britney listened carefully to Wilson and watched the prince's reaction. The prince did not believe a single word the count said. At this point, the Duchess stood up for Britney. The woman could not allow her daughter to be slandered. Wilson continued to make excuses, but not a single word of the count could influence those present. Britney and her mother looked at the traitor with disdain. The Crown Prince had his last word and sent Count Miles away. The Crown Prince and the Duchess were sitting in the living room of the sewing workshop. The prince held Britney's hand gently, knowing that there would be a bruise where he had grabbed it. Anthony watched Britney closely, after which he decided to reveal the secret of his appearance in the workshop. The Duchess and her daughter Britney prepared to listen attentively to the prince. The prince said that he visited the workshop in order to study modern trends in women's fashion. Britney was surprised. But the ladies continued to listen to Anthony's story. Anthony has a younger sister, but the sister has very bad skin and never goes out in public. The sister only interacts with a few servants and the royal family. The princess spends every day in voluntary confinement. Anthony, for his part, tries to inform his sister about new fashion trends in order to arouse the girl's interest. Britney and her mother continued to listen attentively to the prince's revelations. The heir to the throne was pleased to meet Countess Anders here. Anthony explained that there were rumors in society about a significant improvement in the Duchess's appearance. The Duchess thanked the prince for the compliment and shared her secret about skin cream. Having heard this information, the prince began to ask to share the miraculous cream with him, but Britney flatly refused to give the princess the cream she had prepared for her mother. The Duchess was confused by her daughter's reaction. Britney explained to the prince that the princess's skin was different from the Duchess's, and perhaps the girl needed a different cream composition. The three adults were pondering together how they could arrange a meeting between the princess and Britney. Britney was confused. Anthony tried to think about this topic. Britney watched the prince closely. The decision came unexpectedly. Anthony hastened to voice it. North wing of the imperial castle, the princess's chambers. The maid was rolling out the evening dinner for the sick princess. The girl tried to reach out to the untouchable and reclusive person, but not a single sound could be heard from behind the doors. The maid continued to stand persistently at the door and call the princess. Suddenly the maid was interrupted by a new maid. Having informed the maid that at this stage her services were no longer needed and the dinner prepared for the princess could be left at the door, the princess, hidden under a dark veil, sat by the closed window. The girl confidently approached the door and knocked, first stating her name. The princess gave permission to enter. 2 days before the moment described above, invitation to the imperial castle personally for Lady Britney Anders. An imperial servant arrived at Duke Anders's castle with an important message from the prince himself. The arriving carriage could be seen from Ms. Britney's bedroom window. Britney was surprised by such a quick invitation to the imperial castle. It turned out that Prince Anthony decided not to delay the agreement and to begin implementing the plan immediately. The prince was aware of Lady Britney Anders' abilities. On the day of the unexpected meeting, the young people agreed to save the princess from her illness. Britney promised the prince to try making cream for the princess. The prince promised to arrange a meeting between Britney and the princess. Britney watched from the window as the events unfolded, realizing that the imperial carriage had arrived for her. The imperial servant bowed politely and invited Britney to follow him into the carriage. Britney didn't keep us waiting long and got ready very quickly. Unexpectedly, Britney's half-sister Leslie followed her. Leslie was surprised. She did not expect to see the imperial carriage, and even less her older sister, with an official invitation from the prince himself. Britney looked at her upset sister in surprise. Leslie honestly didn't understand why Britney was being invited to the imperial castle. Leslie was very upset. The girl was planning to get to the prince's reception. Britney understood perfectly well her stepsister's intentions and all her insidious plans. Leslie was constantly seeking meetings with Crown Prince Anthony Perry. All of Leslie's actions were aimed at the inevitable meeting with the prince. And this time Leslie was persistent and decided to resort to a hidden weapon. The girl reminded Britney of the recent scandal, having said that Britney is an abandoned bride and it is too early for her to appear in society. But the Crown Prince's loyal servants informed Leslie that the prince wished to see Britney Anders' older sister in the castle. The conversation between the sisters came to a decisive end. All of Leslie's arguments were unfounded. The upset, scheming stepsister stayed home. Leslie cried and stamped her feet. Britney looked at her sister with undisguised pride, but decided to calm her sister down one last time, telling Leslie that she was very sorry about such a failure. Britney followed into the carriage. Britney Anders was heading to the imperial castle at the invitation of the Crown Prince himself. Leslie Anders stayed home, running away from anger and jealousy. For the first time in her short life, Britney felt like a winner. For the first time in her life, Leslie failed to win a duel with her sister. Britney reminded her sister that the entire imperial society believed that Leslie had stolen Wilson Miles's fiancé from her sister and that Leslie should not appear in public after such a disgrace. Britney Anders won the first round. After a few hours of travel, Britney arrived at the imperial castle. The imperial castle was magnificent in the afternoon sun. Britney, accompanied by the subjects of the imperial majesty, walked towards the princess's chambers. At the door to the room, the travelers were met by the princess's faithful servant. The girl introduced herself and promised Britney to take her to the mistress's chambers. Britney was worried. She really wanted to help the crown princess with her illness. Britney and the maid stood at the door of the room, waiting for permission to enter. In the princess's room, everything was ready to welcome the guests. Tea and treats were on the table. Britney walked carefully through the door. The princess was sitting by the window, waiting for her guest. Britney took a close look at the princess. The girl was hidden behind a black veil, but politely invited the guest to the table. Britney accepted the invitation and did not refuse a cup of hot, delicious tea. The princess was modest and not talkative, and silence hung in the princess's guest room. Britney recalled her younger half-sister's comments about the princess's skin. The entire empire knew that the princess suffered from a skin disease. Leslie did not mince words, and constantly said that with such skin, it would be better for the princess not to appear in public. In the end, the princess did just that, stopped appearing in public altogether, and became a recluse. Britney also remembered her attitude towards the princess. The girl always stood up for the princess and stopped Leslie's statements. The princess was silent. The conversation did not go well. Britney knew she had to get the princess talking, so she started the conversation by telling her about meeting the crown prince. Britney has spoken out about how Wilson Miles attacked her, how cruelly he treated Britney, grabbing the girl by the tender skin of her hand. Britney showed off the remaining bruise from the brutal attack. The princess came to life before our eyes and expressed sympathy to Britney. At the same time, she reported that Britney's ex-fiancé is a real villain and a very cruel person. Britney was surprised by the princess's knowledge, but the most important thing is that the princess started talking to Britney. The crown princess's latest revelation was that she expressed her trust in Britney. This was a very important moment for Britney Anders herself. Crown Princess Vivian Perry has decided to entrust her health and her life to Duchess Britney Anders, a girl with a very dubious reputation. Britney stood up from her seat and walked towards the princess. Duchess Britney Anders was determined. Britney sat down next to the princess and raised her hands to the veil. Peering carefully under the black veil, Britney carefully examined Vivian's skin. After the examination, the princess put her veil back on. Britney informed the princess that the examination was over and thanked Vivian for her patience. The princess shared her memories of various treatments with Britney. The princess told Britney about her decision to continue leading a reclusive lifestyle. Britney listened attentively to the princess. At the same time, she reminded Vivian of the concerns of her brother, Crown Prince Anthony. After the conversation ended, Britney curtsied, and the girls headed to the botanical garden at the imperial castle. Britney needed ingredients to make a cream. The composition was simple lavender and aloe. Britney pondered the ingredients of the life-saving cream. The princess allowed the use of all plants growing in the garden. The girls stood at the entrance to the botanical garden and had a nice conversation. From afar, it was clear that the ladies had found a common language. For the first time in a very long time, Vivian conversed with someone other than her faithful maid. Britney was happy to join the conversation. The girl enjoyed communicating with Vivian. The princess was smart and well-read. The princess's stern tone was disconcerting, but Britney decided that over time the princess would become softer and kinder. Suddenly, Britney heard a familiar voice. Prince Anthony Perry appeared in the corridor of the botanical backyard. Handsome Prince Anthony greeted the ladies with a cheerful voice, showed interest in Britney's person. The sister interrupted her brother's cheerful conversation, informing Anthony that they had come to an agreement with Britney. The sister told Anthony that she had decided to entrust her treatment to the girl and would help the Duchess in every possible way. The brother was very happy with this decision. The princess did not hide her joy. Watching Britney leaving the castle, Vivian told her brother that the girl was not at all like what people said about her. Anthony was very glad to hear such thoughts about the guest from his sister. The prince recalled an episode from his sister's childhood. He remembered trying to calm his little sister down by trying to grab her shoulder, and at that moment, little Britney appeared with words of defense for the princess. Princess Vivian looked at Britney with her childish, upset eyes and listened attentively to her protector. The prince recalled all the details as if it had happened yesterday. Princess Vivian could not remember this incident, but she believed her brother. Vivian informed the prince about the end of their meeting, and she left the reception room, leaving Anthony to ponder on a free topic. The princess gave orders to her faithful servant to buy all the ingredients according to the list left by Duchess Britney. The prince was left alone, lost in childhood memories. Work was in full swing in Duke Anders's castle. Britney worked without closing her eyes, making cream for the crown princess. And after a certain amount of time, the cream was ready. Britney's thoughts were interrupted by a knock on the door. Britney looked back and allowed entry. An angry brother, Jerry Anders, stood outside his sister's room. Britney turned around. Jerry Anders's brother stood at the door. The brother was very angry and furious. Britney was distracted from her work by the groans of her angry brother. Jerry did not believe that Britney was invited to the imperial castle and expressed his indignation. But the butler interrupted his brother's monologue and Jerry turned towards the door. Britney listened attentively to the butler. The butler announced that Her Majesty the Crown Princess of the Empire Vivian Perry was waiting for Lady Britney. Britney immediately headed to the reception hall. In the reception hall, Princess Vivian herself stood next to the window, covered with a veil. And the only factor that marred the princess's presence was Leslie's appearance. Leslie stood before the princess with her head bowed. The princess did not understand the girl's brazen appearance, as she had given clear instructions to invite her older sister Britney Anders. Britney's appearance eased the situation a little, but the incident was still very unpleasant. Britney tried to apologize for her sister, but the princess was upset by Leslie's actions and words, and suggested that Britney go to the reception room for a private conversation. The princess, accompanied by Britney, went to the reception hall. Leslie stood in the reception hall, spat upon and humiliated, not understanding what had happened or when Britney had managed to gain the princess's favor. A private conversation between the princess and Britney took place. Britney has prepared a new cream with a pleasant lavender scent. The princess inquired about the composition of the new cream. Britney assured Vivian that the ingredients were the same, the only change being the persistent lavender scent. The princess was so moved by the care that she decided to lift her veil. Vivian's face was not yet completely healed, but the result was noticeable. The princess's green eyes radiated kindness and gratitude. Britney was touched by such trust from the princess and did not know what to say. Vivian Perry, the crown princess of the empire, offered her patronage and friendship as a token of gratitude for her skill and kind attitude towards her person. Britney was happy. The girls were both glad that they became friends. Vivian decided to help Britney establish sales of the miraculous cream. Since the princess decided that the cream created by Britney should help not only a certain number of people, but also the inhabitants of the empire. The girls agreed to involve the prince in the project, since Crown Prince Anthony was strong in trade. The meeting between the two friends was over, and Britney was heading to her father's office. Britney pressed the door handle to her father's office with a confident hand. The girl stood in front of the Duke, not lowering her eyes. The Duke was delighted. He was glad that Princess Vivian herself visited his castle. Britney confirmed to her father the news of the princess's visit. The Duke was completely delighted, and the father was filled with happiness. Britney coughed slightly, reminding the butler of his role in this story. The butler took Britney's hint and informed the Duke of how Jerry and Leslie had upset Her Majesty Vivian Perry. The Duke asked Britney about what had happened, and the girl confirmed the butler's words with great joy, knowing full well that her sister and brother would fall into a trap. The Duke listened attentively to Britney, after which he clenched his fist in rage. The Duke's teeth ground with anger. An angry Duke Anders ordered Leslie and Jerry to be summoned to his office immediately. Jerry and Leslie stood in front of the Duke and Britney with their heads down. The Duke demanded an explanation and an apology to Britney. The brother and sister reluctantly gave their explanations and apologized to Britney without sincerity. At this point, the family meeting was over. Britney was holding the handle of the office door, and she quickly left the Duke's office. Crown Prince Anthony Perry was waiting to meet Duchess Britney Anders. The meeting took place in the library. Britney sat opposite the prince. She listened attentively to the prince's ideas on the development of Britney's business. The young people were very serious. The library table was littered with papers. Anthony explained the essence of the contract to Britney, carefully reading each clause. Britney, for her part, asked questions and made corrections. The prince was surprised by the young girl's insight. He sat on the soft sofa and watched the captivated Britney. Having finished studying the contract, Britney crossed her arms over her chest and began asking awkward questions about the production of cosmetics. The prince understood all of Britney's doubts and confidently explained all the sharp corners. The main issue was Leslie's involvement in the production process, as the girl would soon discover the gift of healing within herself. The agreement was fully agreed upon and signed by both parties. The business union of Duchess Britney Anders and Crown Prince Anthony Perry has taken place. The contract was signed and Britney decided to leave Anthony's company. The girl tried to leave the library, turning her back to the prince. Anthony was not happy with this turn of events and he rushed to stop Britney. Britney stopped, turning to face the prince. Anthony smiled, and completely unexpectedly he reached out to Britney's hair. The girl didn't notice how the prince appeared very close to her. Anthony's handsome face loomed over Britney's. A frightened Britney pulled away from the prince, not understanding what was happening. The prince explained to the girl that he had removed a speck of dust from his hair. Britney told Anthony that he could have just told her, and Britney would have handled her hair herself. Britney noticed the prince's beauty and politeness, but the young duchess did not know what a cruel joke fate had played on Anthony in childhood. A broken carriage in the pouring rain in complete darkness. A child and a young woman, both covered in blood and motionless. A bloodied child reaches out to his dead brother and dead mother. This is Crown Prince Anthony Perry. Every time after a quarrel with her husband, Anthony's mother went to her parents' place, and on that terrible day, everything was as usual, but this time Anthony persuaded his mother to take the children with her. And then a misfortune happened. The carriage overturned. Everyone died except Anthony. The father blamed his son for the death of his mother and brother. Anthony was accused by his own father of the deaths of his family. The father looked like a monster in the eyes of the child. There were also rumors throughout the empire that the father was cheating on his mother and that the murder of his wife was his doing. Upon learning this, the king of the empire expelled his son from the palace, taking into his own hands the education of his surviving grandson. Little Anthony became the ward of his grandfather, the ruler of the empire. Anthony was worried about his father's exile. His guilt had not been proven and various rumors were circulating in the empire. The ruler of the empire decided to raise Anthony as a worthy emperor, placing a huge burden of responsibility on the boy. The ruler of the empire was very strict and demanding. Anthony came under pressure from his grandfather from a young age. Soon news came of his father's death, and a coffin with his body arrived in the capital of the empire. The day of the funeral was a sad one. Anthony was torn between painful doubts and hatred. The boy hated his father for what he did to his mother and brother. At the same time, he also doubted his grandfather. Anthony was full of doubts even when the butler invited the boy to participate in the funeral ceremony. Anthony left the funeral hall, leaving the emperor's grandfather alone, accompanied by a butler. The boy ran away from the castle. Feelings of uncertainty, fear, and resentment tore Anthony apart from the inside. The pressure of the powerful grandfather worsened the child's situation. Anthony ran without looking where he was going. Suddenly, a beautiful little girl appeared in the boy's path. The girl introduced herself as little Britney Anders. Beautiful girl with red hair and silver hair. Anthony stopped and began to listen carefully to Britney. Britney tried to calm the upset boy. For the first time in his life, Anthony allowed himself to share his grief with a stranger. He told about the tragedy that had happened and how his little sister had cried in his arms. After the accident with the carriage, Anthony spent a whole hour in the overturned carriage and calmed his little sister. Britney listened attentively to the boy, trying not to interrupt. Anthony told the girl about the courtiers who blame him for the death of her mother, brother, and now father. The boy also talked about how difficult it is for him, how he is forced to pretend to be strong, although at heart he is a very vulnerable child. Britney listened to the confession of the future emperor and calmed Anthony down. The girl found the right words and instilled self-confidence in the boy. Anthony calmed down, and a smile lit up his face. Without fear, the boy returned to the imperial castle and appeared before the emperor. The grandfather looked at his grandson attentively. Anthony looked into his grandfather's eyes with an open, confident gaze. The crown prince promised the emperor to become the best ruler and a worthy heir. Anthony made a promise to his grandfather and kept his promise. The boy worked tirelessly and improved his skills. Anthony grew up to be a worthy heir, a handsome, strong, and wise future emperor. A meeting with an old acquaintance in a sewing studio awakened a familiar feeling in Anthony. The prince looked at the girl and could not believe his eyes. Britney Anders, his first love, stood before him in all her glory. A new, beautiful day has arrived at Anders Castle. Britney sat next to her mother and engaged in casual conversation. It was at this moment that Leslie appeared on the threshold of the room. The girl held a bouquet of lilies in her hands. In the original novel, this was one of the turning points. It was at this point that Britney's reputation was ruined forever. Britney lost her temper and snatched the bouquet from Leslie's hands. At the same time, he hit his stepsister on the cheek. Leslie stepped aside, feigning hurt, knowing full well how her sister would react. It was at that moment that Jerry entered the room. Britney tried to explain to those present that white lilies are only given to the dead, but Leslie told everyone around her that she had made a mistake in choosing flowers and did not know that lilies cannot be given to living people. This is exactly the story that her sister told the ladies of the court. But the story was known to Britney, and Leslie once again fell into her own trap. Britney took the bouquet from her sister and at the same time asked the servants who bought the bouquet for the mistress. Britney discovered that Leslie had purchased the bouquet herself, not understanding the significance of white lilies. At this time, brother Jerry entered the room and saw a completely different picture. Britney handed over the bouquet, telling her brother that Leslie had bought dead flowers for their mother. Leslie began to make excuses to her brother. The girl pressed herself against Jerry's chest and began to pretend to be an offended innocent. Britney listened to Leslie's naive and stupid story about her failures and knowledge. Jerry listened attentively and believed every word of his little sister. The confrontation between the sisters ended. Leslie blamed the governess for everything, who, according to the girl, did not give her knowledge about the meaning of flowers in social etiquette. The decision was made to fire the governess, but Britney couldn't leave things like that. The girl invited the governess who had suffered from the lie to dinner, and she provided the woman with a letter of recommendation with which she would be able to find a new job very quickly. Britney happily handed the envelope to the governess. The woman thanked Britney, telling the Duchess that all the gossip about her character was fiction. Britney saw the satisfied woman off. The governess left the castle. Britney was pleased with herself, and the girl managed to get around this trick of her stepsister. At this time, Leslie is in her room thinking about the latest events. Leslie nervously combed her blue hair. The girl sincerely did not understand why all her plans and intrigues had collapsed. For what reason is her sister one step ahead? Previously, everything worked out the way Leslie wanted. The Duke was sure that Leslie was kind and sympathetic, and Britney was evil and envious. In all situations, Leslie emerged victorious. The Duke always took the side of his youngest daughter. All Britney's attempts to justify herself were in vain. From the sidelines, all the aristocrats watched the terrible Britney. Everyone saw how the girl mocked her younger sister. Ladies from the highest society looked at Britney with disapproval and at Leslie with support. Leslie's brother and father were constantly protective of her and hostile towards Britney. To everyone around her, Leslie was a smart and beautiful woman. Britney was a villain. Leslie noticed changes in Britney's character. If before Britney was not restrained and could be easily controlled, now the girl was much calmer. Britney had daily conversations with her mother, and all of Leslie's tricks Britney overcame with pride. Britney easily figured it out and avoided trouble with the pink dress. With a bouquet of flowers and a zinc pan, The whole environment was positive towards Britney. Britney met the imperial family and became friends with the princess. Leslie looked at herself in the mirror and couldn't understand how the hot-tempered Britney had managed to do all this. Alone, Leslie thought about a new trap for Britney. Leslie thought about how she should take everything from her half-sister and stand in her place. A few days later, in the imperial castle, the ladies of society were discussing and gossiping about Anders's elder sister, making Leslie look like a villain. The aristocrats turned around, involuntarily watching the sisters appear in the hall. Leslie Anders' younger sister was the first to enter, and the ladies did not hold back their emotions. Britney couldn't stay away and said a few phrases in defense of her little sister. The phrases were witty enough and constructed in such a way that, quite by accident, Leslie was shown in a less than favorable light. Leslie's plan to discredit her sister failed. The girl had no choice but to leave the evening. The ladies of the court continued to gossip behind the sisters' backs, and Leslie turned and headed for the exit. Britney pretended to be very sorry, and with a sad look she followed her sister out. Leslie turned around to look at her sister again, trying to say something. But Leslie's security guard blocked Britney's path, and the girl couldn't hear anything. Leslie's loyal bodyguard stopped Britney, and the young man realized the girl's bad intentions. The sisters exchanged glances again. At that moment, Britney realized that Leslie's faithful guardian was still with her. Britney watched the carriage as it drove away. Britney remembered the frightening look from Leslie's security guard. Britney also recalled that in the original story, Leslie will soon become a healer, and how her sister will use her gift is unknown. Britney knew her future was in danger. The young Duchess sat down at her desk. Britney remembered the look on the guard's face and knew that it would be difficult to gain the guard's trust. The residential building of the Knights of the Guard was located at a distance from the castle, but Britney managed to sneak into the building and eavesdrop on the guards' conversations. Britney knew that security was completely on Leslie's side. The young Duchess Britney stepped confidently onto the marble floor. Britney headed to her stepsister's bedroom. For several days, Leslie had been driving away all the servants and not eating. Britney managed to talk to Leslie's most loyal servant and establish a trusting relationship with the girl. Britney learned that Leslie had insulted the maid very badly, and the maid's trust in Leslie was lost. The young Duchess managed to win over another of Leslie's opponents to her side, but Britney had other concerns. Covered in a country cloak, the girl had to leave for the capital. In the carriage, Britney told her mother about the upcoming meeting with the prince, and about the purpose of the meeting. Britney was happy to work with Anthony. At the appointed time in the appointed place, the future business lady was waiting for her business partner. The prince did not keep us waiting long and appeared on time. A couple of young people dressed as commoners set out to find property to open their first cosmetic store. The partners walked around almost the entire center of the capital, but the search for premises was unsuccessful. Tired from the long walk, Anthony and Britney sat down on a bench. Britney shared her fantasies about developing a cosmetics brand with the prince. The girl spoke vividly about how she sees the transformation of young and not-so-young ladies. The prince listened attentively to Britney, interjecting his own suggestions. At the same time, Britney did not miss the opportunity to take an interest in the prince's life and his training with the Knights of the Empire. The young Duchess told the prince that she had seen the guards' grueling training under the scorching sun. It was the scorching sun that gave Britney the idea of creating a sun protection product. The girl was fired up by a new idea and a new product. After some time, the lease agreement for the building was signed. An excellent location for the store was found. Britney and Anthony's first office was opened. A wonderful business alliance has taken place. The young people stood in front of the doors of their first store and couldn't take their eyes off it. Happy Britney couldn't calm down. For several hours in a row, she talked about her plans for the future. The prince couldn't take his eyes off Britney. Britney was wary. The girl was afraid that her relatives would find out about her achievements. Britney was afraid that Jerry and Leslie would interfere in her affairs and turn her father against the development of cosmetics production. Anthony was a real gentleman and walked Britney home. The mother and the faithful butler met the girl at home. A happy Britney walked towards her mother and the servant. Britney turned around and watched Anthony walk away. Anthony, wearing a country cloak, walked away from Britney's house. Mom and Britney watched the prince go. Mom was happy. The woman was inspired by her daughter's attitude. Britney shared good news. The imperial castle greeted the approaching night. The crown prince returned home and immediately went to his sister's room. The princess greeted her brother in a good mood without a black veil, drinking aromatic tea. Vivienne looked at her happy brother. The prince was happier than ever. He remembered the beautiful and flawless Britney. He was captivated by the girl's persistence and business acumen. The prince listened attentively to all ideas regarding the development of Cosmetic's production. The prince recalled how Britney carefully read the lease and convinced the tenant to lower the price. Anthony admired the young duchess. The prince was so enthusiastic when telling his sister about Britney that he even forgot to mention the girl's name. The princess asked her brother who he was talking about, but Anthony never gave a name. Sometime later, the training base of the knights guarding the imperial lands. The training is in full swing. Duchess Leslie's faithful knight was restless while waiting for his mistress. Those present froze as she appeared on the threshold of the training base. Young Duchess Britney Anders stood in all her glory, holding a heavy basket in her arms. The knights did not expect her appearance.